Well, welcome everyone to our training today on the Peaceful Birth Method. My name is Victoria Tippins, and I'm going to be taking you through the training today. I'm super excited. Yeah, so the Peaceful Birth Method is a 5-step process. It's my framework to support moms in feeling confident and prepared for birth. And I created it over 15 years of supporting families through pregnancy, birth, and postpartum. And this is more to me than just a childbirth class. This is a movement to support families and having more peaceful birth experiences. And I believe that peaceful birth experiences will change the world. Because if you go into birth feeling confident and prepared, and you're surrounded by people who believe you can do it, that is going to help moms feel like they can do it when they're in parenthood. That is going to really set the tone for your entire journey of parenthood. And when our children see that, the mothers that are modeling to them are believing that they're more than enough, they're connected to their intuition, they love themselves. That is going to teach the children to love themselves and teach the children to believe that they are more than enough. So if you are feeling worried about birth and you're told that tearing just happens and unwanted interventions are inevitable, and you've been told that birth is inherently painful and dangerous and terrifying, I'm here to give you some tools to help you write a different story. The product of, or the reason why so many people are terrified of birth is because in the West, in the early 1900s, doctors realized that birth was an untapped market. And so in order to make the most money off of people giving birth, we need to convince them that their bodies are broken and that they need something outside of themselves in order to give birth. That's totally bullshit because your body was made to do this. This deep terror of birth didn't start becoming really popular until around the 1920s. Before then, people would give birth with midwives and family doctors and had really good experiences, and birth was seen as something that was much more positive, and there was a lot more empowerment and trust in our body than there is today. So the reason why so many of us have fear is just because we are still, living in a culture that has this foundational perspective of birth around fear. And at the same time, we see a lot of movies and media, and movies often portray birth as something that is really scary, and that totally impacts, our frame of mind. So I'm hoping today I can help you overcome some fear and give you some tools to help you create a better story about your birth. So my name is Victoria Tippins. I've been attending births for 15 years as a doula and birth educator and a student midwife, and I developed the Peaceful Birth Method by combining the best evidence-based research with traditional wisdom passed down through generations of midwives. So now over 1,000 parents in more than 50 countries have used this method to have more peaceful birth experiences in alignment with their values. And so these are the results. For the moms who used this method, they were 7 times less likely to tear while giving birth compared to the national average. So 91% did not tear. They were 8 times less likely to have a cesarean. 96% have a vaginal birth. They were 3 times more likely to have an unmedicated birth. 96% have an unmedicated birth, and 100% reported feeling confident going into birth. And that is really huge, and that is the part that I want to really bring our attention to. The reason why the people who followed my 5-step process that I'm going to be teaching you today and my students have such good outcomes with avoiding tearing and avoiding C-section and having unmedicated births, if that's what they want, is because they work through their fear. If they went into birth with a lot of fear and that statistic over here didn't look as good, I'm sure that these would not look as good either. And that's because, with my first I tore because I was terrified of giving birth. I was really afraid, not of labor, but of pushing and tearing specifically. And I didn't work through that fear, and so I added a lot more force, a lot more pressure to get the baby out faster. And that is totally why I tore. So if I had worked through that fear beforehand, I really believe I would have been able to have an intact perineum. You know, the World Health Organization says that true maternal pathology and cesarean should happen about 10 to 15% of the time, but the C-section rate in the US is above 33%. So clearly over half of C-sections are unnecessary, medically unnecessary. Often the reason why women have unnecessary C-sections is because they make choices from fear rather than making choices deliberately, informed choices confidently from a place of love for their baby. When we make choices from fear, we have fear going into birth, it can make labor stall. It can lead to us feeling bullied into getting certain interventions. We don't have tools or confidence to say no to maybe unnecessary interventions that have risks that can lead to C-section. Yeah, and you know, for the unmedicated births, if you go into birth feeling really confident and prepared and feeling like, I can do this, you know, like I can cope with labor. I have tools, and also I've developed the nervous system capacity to be able to release control, to feel safe being in an experience that is vulnerable. That is what's going to help you have an unmedicated birth. When we go into birth with fear, a couple different things can happen. One is that we create tension, or we hold tension in the musculature around the pelvis. And when we're holding tension around the musculature, we create this restriction. And so the pelvis isn't able to be very mobile when we're creating restriction. And that makes it a lot harder for a baby to engage in your pelvis and work all the way through. Your baby has to go through a series of positions to navigate through your pelvis. When we have fear, we create tension, and then we create restriction, and there's less space that supports your baby in getting in the position that they need to get into to move through birth. This is why overcoming fear is so essential, and the number one most important thing, the best thing you can do if you are wanting to have an unmedicated birth. What I'm going to cover today is my 5-step process to support peaceful birth. And number one is emotional preparation. So we're going to talk about the importance of emotional preparation to support you in having a smooth labor. We're going to talk about your birth team and environment, and we'll learn some often overlooked environmental factors that can make your birth experience so much easier or harder. I'm going to talk about informed care and informed consent, and how to find a care provider who practices it, or how to, you know, increase the likelihood of having an experience where informed consent is part of your practice. Number 4 is positions and tools for birth. So we're talking a little bit about the importance of positioning to help your baby navigate the pelvis. And number 5 is tools for reducing your risk for tearing. So we're going to talk about why many standard techniques for pushing can increase your tearing risk, and talk about what to do instead. Peaceful birth is possible for everyone. It does not matter where you are giving birth. If you're giving birth at home, in the hospital, in a birth center, it is absolutely possible for everyone, no matter the resources you have access to, no matter the options you have access to. Peaceful birth is something that you always have access to, because your body knows how to do this. And when we learn how to quiet down the noise and really fully show up for this journey, love ourselves, and learn how to work through our fear and overcome any limiting beliefs we have around birth, then we're just getting out of our own way to allow for our body to do, you know, what it is meant to do. And there is no wrong way to give birth. From a planned C-section to at home birth, any kind of birth experience that you want is absolutely possible, and if it feels good to you, that's the perfect path for you. What matters is that you are making your own informed choices in alignment with your values, that you feel supported, you know, and respected every step of the way. And the steps that I'm going to teach you today have helped all of my moms have better birth experiences, but you know, they do not guarantee outcomes, because birth is birth, so we cannot promise that your birth is going to look a certain way. But there are so many things you can do to absolutely increase the likelihood of having the kind of birth that you want. So I'm going to just share a quick story about me, which was the story about like the first baby that I was present for. This birth, this one actually here, it was the second one. So when I was 14, I attended a birth. When I was 16, I attended a birth and caught the baby. And it was my first birth as a doula. Like after I got my training. And like what happened was the mom was near pushing and the nurses came in and they were like, the doctor's not here. And someone's got to catch the baby and hopefully the doctor gets here in time. And the mom was like, can Victoria catch the baby? And everyone kind of was silent, looked at me, and I was like, yeah, I'll catch the baby. I would love to catch the baby. So I caught the baby and it was amazing. And the doctor actually came in right before the baby came and put his hands under mine, and the baby just glided out into my hands, and I lifted the baby up. And when I lifted the baby up to the mom, and the mom like saw her baby for the first time, and I saw that look on her face, it was one of the most beautiful experiences of my life. And I learned then that nothing is more sacred than birth. Birth is this, can be so joyful, and it is inherently the nature of it, a ceremony and a celebration of life. And then, I went to another birth, had a really scary forceps delivery. Her regular doctor was on vacation, so this other doctor came in, spoke really aggressively. I heard the nurses outside talking about rushing over rooms, and I was watching the baby's heart rate on the monitor, and it was 130, which was completely normal, and it stayed 130 the whole time. Yet this doctor stormed in and claimed it was a problem and said that she was going to use forceps to get the baby out faster. And my doula training had not taught me to interfere with doctors, so I froze. And this is where the doula training fails doulas, because I think still, even back then, almost 15 years ago, we need to learn how to advocate as a doula. That's part of our job, is to advocate. So I didn't have not only the lack of like advocacy tools, but I had a lack of nervous system capacity. I did not have the nervous system capacity. And that is why I teach the mamas who are in my program how to expand their nervous system capacity and feel confident in advocacy. Because if you learn about your options and you learn tools for advocacy, that's great. But if you don't have nervous system capacity to be able to, in that moment, say whatever it is that you need to say to advocate for yourself, then, often we enter a nervous system response and we freeze. This mom experienced a forceps delivery that was likely unnecessary, and it was, traumatic for her. And this decision to do the forceps delivery was made out of, probably convenience. There's a reason why the medical model is so intervention heavy. But if we were to look at, the entire medical model and compare it to the models of care in other countries in the world, and we see how our maternal mortality rate is one of the worst, and yet we have some of the highest intervention rates, we'll see that okay, maybe all these high intervention rates for everyone is not actually improving outcomes. Maybe it's even making it worse. The nature of birth is beautiful. Birth is so beautiful. It's like a really sensitive and important experience that we can absolutely really show up fully for and support moms with evidence-based practices and having safe, beautiful, smooth experiences. And also, there is a gap in the Western medical model, and that gap can sometimes lead to feelings of powerlessness and trauma that is completely unnecessary. And the gap is in personalized care and offering care in alignment with what works best for you, what your intuition is, taking into account your family history, all these different pieces to make choices, and to give you the emotional support. Instead, often moms fall on a conveyor belt model of care where they are told that, for example, your water is broken. Now you need to get Pitocin to make your labor start. This happens, X happens, and then you get Y. So we're just kind of following this conveyor belt model of care. We go to appointments and they just really, focus on the medical piece. But what's so important is that even though, the medical model likely won't invite you to focus on the other aspects of your wellness, which is your emotional wellness, we need to choose to pay attention to that ourselves and choose to check in with how we're feeling and use tools, use support to help us to expand our nervous system capacity to feel safe in the presence of normal biological labor, to reframe our limiting beliefs around birth that we've all been fed through a culture that inherently fears birth, right? Especially through movies and media, and to develop a nervous system capacity to be able to, advocate for ourselves in the moment. And it is through that personalization and support that we are more likely to have the kind of experience that we want to have, that we can go into a relationship with our care provider where we are partners in our care rather just than being like told what to do and just following the algorithm, which we know that model for everyone does not produce the best outcomes. I just wanted to share quickly like a little bit about my first birth, which was really beautiful. And I wanted to do everything I could to avoid unnecessary interventions. That's something that was really important for me personally. And I had a great birth, but my postpartum was like super hard because I wasn't prepared for postpartum and I tore. And I didn't have the tools in the moment to help me like prevent tearing, even with being a doula for 9 years. And it was mostly because I had the fear. After that, I went on to be a student midwife and I started teaching classes. This picture here is a class I taught just last month. I started teaching classes and many of the people who attended my class asked me if I would attend their births. So I got to see firsthand whether or not what I taught actually helped, which was really cool as a birth educator to get to like help me refine and see like what people were applying and what they remembered, what the results actually were. So over many years, I refined this 5-step process to peaceful birth through that work. And I used those 5 steps with my next 2 babies, and I had the home births that I wanted each time with no tearing. And they were some of the most beautiful births, the beautiful experiences of my life. So I looked back on the outcomes from the families that I taught, and I found that the intervention rates were dramatically lower than the national average. So for the first 100 students that worked with me, 98% avoided a Pitocin induction. Now 30% of moms in the US have an induction, and most with Pitocin. 100% avoided episiotomy, and 96% had an unmedicated birth. So I really believe in this framework. It's a super rad framework. I can't wait to share it with you today. And I just want to be clear that, this is not just a birth class. This is a movement. It is here to change our perception of birth and to empower families to have more peaceful birth experiences. And what I really invite you to do is just to recognize in yourself how impactful it is that you are choosing to show up right now to invest in having a more peaceful birth experience and to kind of do that work in overcoming any fear that you have and the stories that we've been told about birth, because it is super unhelpful and hard to be pregnant and to have all these like scary stories be thrown at you. And I do not want that for my daughter. And I'm assuming that you don't want that for your children either. So I just want to celebrate you and acknowledge you right now in choosing to unpack and overcome your fear right now so you can create a more positive birth experience for yourself. And that story will be what your child hears and what will carry forward. And telling your child like, oh, I loved being pregnant with you. I couldn't wait to give birth to you. And giving birth to you was such a beautiful experience. There was so much love in the room. That kind of story, it means so much to our children. And that will help our children to become pregnant and not have to deal with all the bullshit that so many of us are dealing with now because of the scary stories that we have heard and because of the culture at large. So you are unpacking this now so your children do not have to. And that is what a lineage healer does. And that's what you're doing. So good job. Without further ado, the peaceful birth method. Number 1, emotional preparation. I'm going to talk with you today about the importance of emotional preparation and how your hormones totally impact the way that your labor unfolds. So I remember taking my first class when I was pregnant with my first baby. You know, I took a birth class and I learned about like mechanics of labor and positions, but they just said like, you know, affirmations are good. And that's kind of all that I received for emotional preparation. You know, most classes, that's like what it is. Like they'll teach you about the physiology and what happens during birth. And I find that that fails parents because they're not getting, like, this is the gap I was talking about. They're not getting the deeper preparation and the emotional support. And that is what we need for the foundation of literally everything that unfolds going forward, because your body knows how to give birth. Your baby knows how to navigate the pelvis. But if you go into birth feeling afraid, creating tension, that can lead to positioning issues, which makes labor more painful. It can just make labor so much harder and longer. If you go into birth feeling afraid and having attention on fear, like if you have a thought that's like, I'm kind of afraid of tearing, and then you're like, go away thought, and you keep living your life, and then you're like, now I'm kind of afraid of a C-section. You're like, go away thought, right? Like that's what we do. But if we continue to do that, we're keeping our attention on, like a part of our attention, whether we know it or not, is on a fear. When we're in a vulnerable experience, that can come up, and our attention on fear can guide us to make choices from a place of fear, not from a place of love. And that can totally lead us down the path that we're actually wanting to avoid. So when it comes to hormones, your body releases oxytocin when you feel safe. And oxytocin is the hormone that allows for uterine contractions to happen. And so we create oxytocin by feeling love and feeling safe. At the same time, if you feel stressed, or you know, someone, like a machine beeps, or someone comes in the room that says something strange, or you know, like a little thing like that happens, you can tell yourself like, oh hey, I'm fine, like it's just a thought, or it was just like a person coming, or it's just the machine, like it's not a big deal. Like you can totally talk yourself down, but it doesn't matter, because your body has already released the stress hormones to respond instantly to that feeling. So we want to limit anything that can be disruptive and can cause you to feel unsafe as much as possible. I also like to teach that when we're really aware that oxytocin, you know, helps contractions and helps your labor be smooth and effective, if you were to like really truly connect with that piece and create an environment within yourself, an orientation within yourself, your relationship to birth, to your body, to your intuition, and also an environment around you that supports the release of oxytocin, it allows for you to have, like, this is what a lot of moms will say, like, you know, an ecstatic birth, a birth where you have spiritual experiences, where you feel your heart opening, one of the most beautiful experiences of your life, you know, birth can be. And it is because when we have oxytocin, we have endorphins, which causes feelings of euphoria. We're getting this cocktail, and the baby is getting it too, of hormones that are supporting us in feeling really happy and open and relaxed. And that's why I like to teach that birth offers us the opportunity for the highest peak experience of love and joy and bliss that is possible within the human experience. Birth is very, very cool. So, like I said before, fear can trigger stress hormones, which can slow labor down. And when labor gets slowed, we might need more interventions to speed it back up. And that could have maybe been prevented in the first place if we had avoided going into birth with fear. But when we feel safe, it supports our labor and unfolding smoothly, and absolutely leads to an easier birth and better outcomes. I like to say that fear, you know, is normal and is really common, and it's absolutely workable. You know, if you were to go into birth with like a relationship with your fear. So maybe like we haven't totally like erased the fear, but we have a relationship with it. So instead of something that's separate from you that we're resisting, I invite you to look at your fear as a part of you that just needs to be loved, you know? Because you're a human, and we can't control what comes up for us, because we're all human and we're going through a really, you know, intense and transformational experience. And so of course there are going to be some things that come up. But if you have tools to love yourself, to embrace your fear and to feel it rather than resisting it, that approach is really, really effective to help us process what's coming up and take our attention off of it. So then we can put our attention on what it is that we want for our birth. And that is my favorite part of supporting moms with birth, and it's the most effective for sure. There was a mama I supported named Emily, and she came to me at like 35 weeks, and she had a really long and painful birth the first time, and she was terrified of giving birth. And we did 4 sessions together, and after the 4th session, she was like, I can't wait to give birth. Like, I'm so excited to give birth. I can't wait. And she had a 4-hour birth at home with no tearing. So, yeah, it's just like, it wasn't through like learning about positions or learning about physiology. It was through addressing her fear with support was what helped her have that kind of experience. One time I caught a baby for a mom who had a C-section because our doctor said her pelvis was too small and that she would need a C-section for all of her births. But she really wanted to try to have a vaginal birth, so she came to the birth center that I worked for at the time. And I ended up working with her and I guided her through these emotional preparation tools. And then she had a 9-pound baby with no tearing. She had a super fast birth. And her midwife performed a cervical exam during labor. And I remember the midwife was like, oh my gosh, your pelvis is so roomy. Your baby's head is literally wiggling in here. So like, she was given this disempowering narrative about her body, and she chose to reject that and find a provider who could, support her in having the kind of birth that she wanted. And it was through overcoming her fear that supported her in having that, because she could have chosen to just be like, okay, like I should just be afraid and can't trust my body, and just to keep having C-sections, which would have been okay too. But C-sections were not what she wanted, and they also carry a lot more risk, especially repeat C-sections for her. So yeah. So fear can totally take over, and that can lead us to often it leads us to the outcome that we want to avoid. Actually, in my group coaching a few nights ago, there was a mama in there who was like, I think that I want to get a 39-week routine induction. And I was like, okay, why do you want that? And she was like, well, because I'm afraid that my baby will be born in the car on the way to the hospital. So I'd rather just get to the hospital first and then have the baby there. And I was like, okay, that's totally valid if that's what you want to do. But like, what's underneath that? And she was like, it's fear. I have a lot of fear. And I was like, okay, what's the fear about? We explored it. We figured out her fear was about pain. And isn't this funny that so if you get an induction, even with castor oil natural inductions, and also especially Pitocin medical inductions, those tools often make contractions more painful. So happening in the subconscious way, she was going to choose the path because of her fear. She was afraid of pain. So she was going to choose to get an induction, not really realizing that that was her fear, which would have led her to having a birth that was more painful. Isn't that hilarious? And that's how it works, you guys. I don't know. I don't fully even understand why in some circumstances, but I have found again and again and again, when the mama is like, I'm just really afraid of this thing, and they don't address that fear and work through it, they go towards the thing that they're afraid of, one way or the other. Okay, step 2 is building your birth team and environment. So your environment matters so much. And the reason why is because if you feel safe in your environment, it's going to support you in coping with labor well. And if you want an unmedicated birth, that is huge. Even if you don't want an unmedicated birth, we found through research that your chosen provider significantly impacts your risk of experiencing unnecessary interventions, of tearing, and things like that. Your body has this protective mechanism to help you to be safe when you're giving birth. And we are mammals, so this works the same for us. So when an animal is laboring in the wild and it senses a threat, her body is going to slow down or stop to give her a chance to escape. And the exact same process happens in us. Your body doesn't know the difference between a perceived threat and a real one. So like I was talking about before, when you have like a machine beeps or like someone comes in the room that you weren't expecting, that can lead you to having a like fear response. And the fear response can totally slow down your labor. One time I supported a mom whose labor stalled just from the stress of checking into the hospital, and then they kept sending her home, and then labor would pick back up when she got home. Quick tip, if you're planning to birth in the hospital, when you are in active labor and you're ready to go, block out all of your sensory input on the way there. I put on noise canceling headphones, put on sunglasses, type out your birth plan, have it printed, and have your partner or your support person who's taking you there, like be the one to hand it to the nurse, be the one to answer questions and triage, kind of like lead the way so that you can be like, no, I can't hear anything, I can't see anything, like I'm just in the zone and I'm just tuning into the conversation as much as possible. Just a little tip. There are two essential pieces to your environment. One is your team, and the next is the actual physical environment. So with the team, you want to choose people who believe in your ability to give birth. You want people who respect your choices, and you want to make sure that they practice informed consent. We're going to talk about that a little bit more later. And it's important that we're continuously assessing for alignment with our team. If you choose someone and you're like, this person is good, and then like later down the road, all of a sudden they are not respecting your choices, you're leaving feeling kind of anxious, you're leaving feeling disrespected, don't stay with that person, because it's likely that if that person is making you feel that way, that they might also make you feel that way in birth, and we don't want that. A lot of moms don't know that they have the right to change providers even super last minute. Even sometimes, depending on your hospital's Bill of Rights, when you are in labor, you can change your provider. I know a lot of home birth mamas who got a new midwife at the end of pregnancy because they just didn't vibe anymore with their current midwife. So it's your responsibility to assess for alignment, and alignment means you feel good when you are, in like talking to this provider, when you're in their presence, and anyone on your team. The next is your physical environment. So this includes like, lighting and ambience. You want to have lots of labor coping tools available, like birth balls, water, a shower, things like that. You want to have privacy and control over your space. It's important that we're focusing on the many other aspects outside of just like the lighting. There are a lot of moms that I see who come to me and they say, my birth plan, is that I'm going to have low lights and essential oils playing, and I have like my birth ball, and I've been doing hip circles on the birth ball, and that's like kind of it. And that isn't enough to, especially if you want an unmedicated birth. To have an unmedicated birth, we need more than just like dim lights. You need to feel safe enough to open. You need to feel safe to be vulnerable, to be in an experience where you are out of control. And it's about understanding what matters to you and what helps you feel safe, that will help you cope. And a lot of first-time moms think that some of these things are just like nice to have, but they're essential. Having people that can like walk you through this experience, who can support you, who care about you and advocate for you. Having like good quality preparation and education and support leading up to it, and overcoming your fear, all of that is so essential in creating the inner and outer environment that best supports having a peaceful birth experience. It is very, very hard for birth to unfold well if you don't feel safe, because when all the walls are down and you're moving through one of life's most intense experiences, you want it to be easier for you, not harder than it has to be. So one of my students shared her first birth story, and without knowing how to create a supportive environment, she ended up with a provider who didn't practice informed consent. There were not enough labor coping props at the hospital where she was. There were constant disruptions from routine checks and visitors, and then she ended up getting an epidural that she didn't really want. And so she thought that by dimming the lights and playing music, that would be all that she needed, but she learned that there are more critical elements. She learned that it was really important for her to get clear within herself on what it is that would make her feel safe, and then implement those things. And a lot of the time that requires a lot of advocacy. But with her second, she enrolled in my class and learned the things, or all the different tools for creating her ideal team and environment. And still in the hospital, she had a completely different experience. She felt confident going into labor. The environment was perfectly tuned to support her preferences, and she had the unmedicated birth that she wanted and went home feeling like a badass, and rightfully so. And so research, like I mentioned before, totally backs this up. So your risk for interventions, your risk for cesarean, your risk for tearing is totally impacted by the kind of environment that you choose, by the care provider, really, that you choose, the care provider that is there for you. So by learning about these tools and optimizing your environment and birth team, you significantly increase the likelihood of having the kind of birth that you want to have. Step 3 is understanding informed care. So this is one of the biggest factors in determining whether or not you get intervention that you don't want. And I know on the poll that I put in school, a lot of moms said they wanted to learn about how to avoid unwanted interventions. So this would be the foundation for how to do that. So first, your provider choice really matters a lot. But not everyone has access to the same kind of options. Some people have a rotation of OBs and they don't know which one they're going to get. Others have really great options, and they can choose from midwives at home to birth center and midwives in hospital. They know if they choose their OB, that's the one that's going to be there for their birth. Sometimes moms will be with an OB their whole pregnancy, and at the end of pregnancy find out that that OB will be delivering and a stranger will be delivering. So it's important to ask your provider and get really clear with them first around what the agreement is, so that you know. And also, be willing to travel. It's worth it. It's worth it to travel for better care. I supported a mom in my coaching program who had an unmedicated birth with Pitocin, which is almost unheard of because Pitocin can make contractions more painful. And she traveled 2 hours for a midwife in a hospital that was better. The care that she got at the hospital in her town just wasn't very good, and she had a great experience, so it's worth it. There is a difference between your provider being a partner in your care and being an authority over you. When your provider is a partner in your care, they discuss options, they share evidence, they respect your choices, and they practice informed consent. Consent means that you understand the risks and benefits, and you feel supported in saying no. You know it's okay to say no. Authority over you means that things happen to you without your consent, and decisions are based on policy and convenience and outdated protocols. And often moms kind of feel powerless or unheard or disrespected. So this is what I was talking about before with the conveyor belt model of care. When we go into birth, people say okay, you have been dilated 3 centimeters for 4 hours and nothing has changed. Now you need Pitocin. And you just say, okay, I'll do whatever you want, instead of saying oh, what are the risks and benefits? What are my other options? What does the research have to say? And being a partner and asking questions, and then ultimately making the choice deliberately from a place of love in alignment with your birth intention, rather than letting someone else make choices for you, is a better model for a more positive birth experience. And it does lead to better outcomes. I say that very confidently. It takes about 10 to 20 years for current research and evidence to make its way into policy. Actually, there's a policy, so the one that's really common, every hospital is different, but one of the common ones that I see kind of all around the country is if your water has been broken for 24 hours or less, we want you to go into labor with Pitocin. It might even be your water broke, come in right away and get Pitocin. But research and evidence has found that, that policy is actually from the 1950s, when doctors weren't washing their hands in between caring for their patients, and then babies were contracting bacterial infections and having poor outcomes. So that doesn't apply to today. And the current research and evidence says that if you do not have GBS bacteria, which they'll test you for at the end of pregnancy, 48 to 72 hours before going into labor with your water being broken without increasing the risk of infection to baby. And if you knew that, like going into birth, and your water broke and someone said, come into the hospital right away and get Pitocin, you can say, oh, well, Victoria told me in her coaching program that 85% of moms will go into labor spontaneously within 24 hours of their water breaking. And I want an unmedicated birth, and Pitocin makes contractions more painful. So I think that it might be a better choice for me to give myself the 24 hours so long as I remain low risk and it's safe to do so. And there are like things to look at for that. Then I'm just going to do that, and let's reassess in 24 hours and to make a plan with our provider that's more personalized to you. And if you were one of those people and then you went into labor spontaneously, you now went into labor spontaneously and there are more likely to have an easier birth experience compared to an induction, and also likely a less expensive birth experience because induction hospital bills tend to be a little higher. But moms don't know that often, and then they go into labor just like being told what to do. So other examples are like water birth bans, even though water birth is so well researched to be safe, and hospitals are coming around to it. I'm seeing more and more hospitals offering water birth, which is super rad. Also, not eating in labor varies hospital to hospital, but like, please eat in labor, you guys. You need food. You need food when you're going through birth. So this is like this only one way myth where they say like, your baby's breech, schedule a C-section, your water broke, start Pitocin, you've been laboring for 3 hours, time for a cervical exam. Like, we're following an algorithm of policy. But it's important to recognize that policy is sometimes not evidence-based. And there are, like, most providers are really great people who really want to do their best for their patients, but they are limited by the people who make the policies, and they have to follow those policies in order to keep their jobs. Policy makers are not always, thinking about what's best for families. They are concerned about liability and profit and convenience, and all of that does impact policy. So having more knowledge opens more options, and that's what you deserve. You deserve access to all of your options so that you can make informed choices in alignment with your values. And this is also about self-agency, and a lot of moms aren't really a good fit to work with me because they just want to go in and be told what to do and do that. And that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that if that's what you want to do. But that is not what my soul is passionate about supporting. I am on this planet to help families make informed choices in alignment with their values, to have the confidence and the tools to exercise self-agency and reclaim their power, going through birth, because I believe that increases the likelihood of having more peaceful birth experiences. And research has found, like I mentioned before, in the US, we have some of the highest maternal mortality rates, but the highest intervention rates, some of the highest intervention rates. The most obstetricians compared to midwives. We have very few midwives and a lot of obstetricians, but all around Europe, there are way more midwives, and you go to a midwife, and then if you develop high risk pregnancy, then you go see an obstetrician. And what I'm saying is not really the difference between an OB and a midwife. It's about the model of care offering personalization, where the moms are invited to exercise self-agency and make their own choices. So these are the steps to practicing informed care. Number one is to learn the risks and the benefits beforehand, so that you understand what all the knowledge, all the research has to say, and you have that knowledge. The next is to find your ideal model of care. Sometimes we have to travel for this. Sometimes we have to do the best with the options that we have, because everyone has access to different options for sure. But OBs and nurse midwives and certified professional midwives all approach interventions differently and approach informed consent differently. So there are different models of care with different values and a different philosophy. So it's ideal if you can find the model of care that matches your philosophy and helps you feel the most safe. And then number three is to learn tools for advocacy. And so we want to create an environment where little advocacy is needed, if possible, and then from there have conversations throughout labor to help to protect like whatever it is that you want when it's needed, or to like bring up questions and things like that, like use the tools. But if beforehand we can like write a birth plan and bring it to our provider with someone else to go over it and have these kind of conversations before we give birth, it will just decrease the amount of advocacy that will be needed when we're giving birth, and that is really ideal. Number 4 is positions and tools for birth. So the most common position, which is birthing on your back, has the worst outcomes. And the reason why is because, and we have a lot of research on this from evidence-based birth, I learned that doctors are taught how to deliver babies with the mom on their back. And some doctors don't even know like how to deliver a baby in upright positions, and some of them do, but I have heard many stories of providers who mom said like, I'm going to be birthing whatever position I choose, and the doctor says like, okay, yeah, you can labor in whatever position you choose, but when you deliver you need to be on your back. And then mom says, no, I don't think you're understanding me, I'm going to give birth in whatever position I want. And the doctor says, well, how can I like prevent tearing, and how can I deliver the baby like if I can't see what's going on? And the mom said, you're just going to have to be comfortable with that. That was such a great story. And she ended up delivering in hands and knees, and the doctor was just fine with it. He did fine. But there is a limitation. Midwives have limitations and OBs have limitations. Midwives' limitations are around high-risk pregnancies and true maternal pathology. They can do resuscitation, they can address hemorrhage, all the same, but obstetricians are totally needed for high-risk people. Obstetricians are trained for high risk, and they're limited around their tools and knowledge for supporting normal physiologic birth. And that's kind of where like the gap is on each side. So lying on your back puts pressure on a blood vessel that runs behind your uterus, and that can reduce oxygen to the baby, and it increases the likelihood for cesarean. So an evidence-based way to reduce your risk for cesarean is to not birth on your back, and also to avoid episiotomy, which is where they take scissors and they cut through the perineum, and to reduce your risk for tearing is to not be on your back. The best position is to be in whatever position feels best for you. And this is a little gif of me with no pants, about to have my baby on the bathroom floor. I ended up getting into the birth tub like a minute before he came out. You just want to get into whatever position feels best for you, and that position is ideally the one that's really going to support whatever space is needed to be made in your pelvis. And you will feel that in a normal physiologic birth especially, but even with an epidural there are lots of positions you can get in, like hands and knees, even squatting and side lying with a peanut ball, that support labor progress and reduce your risk for tearing. So there are certain positions that create space in different areas of the pelvis. And so if you know about how the baby navigates the pelvis and what positions are best supportive for your baby in getting whatever position they need to get in, that is what's going to help your labor move faster. And I've seen this work so many times. It's really, really incredible when we understand how to use these tools. So a lot of birth classes will teach you like, so they really just taught me like, here are all the different positions for active labor, like for coping with labor. And that's really common. Like hands and knees kind of opens this part of the pelvis and yada, 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 which is great. But if you learn about specifically what position that is going to help your baby in getting in their position that they need to get in, that is like what prevents pain for you. And that is what helps make labors go so much faster. I'm gonna turn off screen share really quick because I just wanna show you. When we have the baby like enter the pelvis in a really, really aligned way, they're putting even pressure on the cervix, like on the inside of the cervix. And when they put even pressure, that is what makes your contractions be like normal, and the pattern continue to progress well. But if your baby's coming down a little bit to one side or a little bit to the other side, they're not putting that even pressure on the inside of the cervix, and that can totally mess up your labor pattern. At the same time, your baby, when they enter the pelvis, we want want them to do some specific things like tucking their chin and engaging in a good way, and then they do this rotation. If they have this at the right space in the pelvis for whatever stage of labor you're in, that supports your baby in getting in the position that they need to get in. And positioning issues lead to cesareans, and they lead to longer, more painful labors, and that absolutely can be avoided just by understanding how this works. And so I teach a formula for early labor, active labor, and pushing, specifically to help your baby in getting in the position that they need to get in and moving through that part of the pelvis. Not only through like opening that part of the pelvis, because that's kind of what a lot of people say, like do the hip circles, it opens the pelvis. We want to not only open the pelvis, we also want to encourage your baby to tuck their chin and do the things that they need to do. And that is like, that information is what really like changes the game. And position is everything. If your baby is in a good position, labor just unfolds so smoothly. And when they are not, labor, is a lot harder. Positions do prevent cesareans. I've seen several dozen births over my years where it looked like mom was going to need a cesarean and the baby was in like a really funky position, and we used specific positions to adjust the baby's position, and that totally prevented the cesarean, and the mom had a vaginal birth. So sporadic labor patterns, long pushing phases, painful back sensations, and stalled labor are all often due to positioning issues, and those can be prevented or addressed in the moment. And so this is a cool story. This mama Claire she wanted a physiologic, like unmedicated birth, and she went to the birth center. She had to transfer because her baby was OP, so the baby was facing forward. She had a sporadic labor pattern and back pain, and she didn't have any coping tools. And she said, like, I took a class at the birth center and it taught me about the normal physiology of birth, but she didn't learn any tools for this. So she transferred to the hospital and she got an epidural and had a really intervention heavy birth, which was not what she wanted. And she described her birth as being traumatic. And then with her second birth, she wanted a home birth. Her baby was still OP, so her baby was still facing forward, but she used the positioning tools from my class to navigate, like her pelvis just might favor OP babies, but she used the tools she learned to open up her pelvis in the right areas at the right time to help the baby to get in the position that they needed to be in to be able to come through. And the baby was born in the birth tub at home, and she described her birth as near orgasmic. And she told me, it was so beautiful. She said it was the most beautiful experience, feeling the intensity of your contraction and still feeling in control. It was really, really cool. Like such a night and day difference, even with an OP baby both times, Okay, so that takes me to step 5, which is pushing and reducing your risk for tearing. 2/3 of mothers tear in the US. 33% avoid tearing, which means 67% experience tearing in the US, which is totally bonkers. And I just want to say right now that it does not make sense from an evolutionary standpoint that most moms would tear while giving birth, because when we tear, we open ourselves up to infection. So if all of human history, all of the moms were tearing and dying from infection, I think it's really unlikely we would have gotten this far. The fact that so many moms tear is not the fault of our bodies. It is not a design flaw. Birth is designed beautifully. It is that there are all these different practices that are antithetical to what most supports protecting your perineum during birth. So like when we do directed pushing, which can be necessary rarely and can have benefits for some on a case-by-case basis, sometimes that can be helpful, but when we do it for everyone, what happens is we just increase the risk for exhaustion, for fetal distress, and for tearing, and we don't want that. So one of my friends was terrified during her birth because they kept yelling at her to push, and she thought her baby wasn't okay, but then she later learned that her baby did great the whole time. So then she was like, okay, why did you yell at me the whole time if my baby was fine? And it's because she was just in this really stressful model of care, kind of doing what the doctor said to do, like get on your back and hold your breath and start pushing. And so she was doing that, not really realizing that there were other options and another way for pushing that could have been more intuitive and slower. This is like a little gift from my third birth, where I experienced the fetal ejection reflex, where your body just spontaneously, pushes without adding any extra force. And this is more protective for your perineum. And it's also way more supportive for your baby and for you, protecting you both from getting exhausted. The cord was wrapped around my baby's neck, and you can kind of see here, I just unwrap it myself. Most of the time when the cord is wrapped around the neck, it doesn't cause any problems. And then the baby, then comes baby. My postpartum experience with tearing the first time was really rough, and it totally could have been prevented if I had learned tools to reduce my risk for tearing and if I had overcome my fear. And so, like I said before, I went on to study as a student midwife, and I was a student midwife for many years in this practice, and they would joke that I would never learn how to repair a tear because hardly anyone ever tore. And this was a very, very busy practice. And it was amazing that they had such a low rate for tearing, even though we had so many moms coming through it. And so I basically took what I learned from that practice and I incorporated it with my own research, evidence-based birth, and also my emotional preparation tools that I created to create my 5-step process to reducing your risk for tears. And 91% of the first 100 moms that I supported did not tear, and 76% of them were first-time moms. And I think that really speaks volumes, because a lot of moms, like I was just texting with a mama, I'm not sure if you're here, if you are, hi, who said, I want a natural birth and I want to avoid tearing. And I know that's a lot to ask as a first-time mom. And I was like, girl, no, it's not. It's totally not a lot to ask. You can absolutely avoid tearing the first time. Yes, tearing sometimes happens, but there are so many ways that we can reduce our risk for tearing. So the 5-step process is emotional preparation, positions and tools for birth, provider hands off, perineal massage in pregnancy, not during birth, in pregnancy, the use of a warm compress. So this is a different approach to pushing that I like to take and like to support moms with. There's this idea that when you are pushing, you have to just get on your back and start doing X, Y, Z. And there are rare circumstances where being on your back is necessary, like if you need forceps or vacuum, or if you actually need an episiotomy. But the evidence-based episiotomy is 1%. Evidence-based episiotomy rate, sorry. It's time for me to have lunch, apparently. I'm skipping my words. It's 1%. So most of the time we don't, that episiotomies are used, we don't actually need them. And if you are birthing in a position that is not on your back, a position that feels comfortable for you, that also is supportive for your perineum, allow your body an opportunity to stimulate the fetal ejection reflex, to use your breath, to use your emotional preparation and emotional tools that you've practiced in pregnancy. That is going to help you be confident and surrendered and soft throughout the process of pushing. And softness in the pelvic floor and the emotional preparation to be able to slow down the delivery of your baby is what helps reduce the risk for tearing. That was a lot of information, and it was really fun to talk about birth with you all for about an hour. And now I have something exciting to offer that I've never offered before, that I created, which is the Peaceful Birth Intensive. So it's a 7-day Peaceful Birth Intensive where you get access to my full program. So you're going to get access to my full online Peaceful Birth Method course. The course that's free is my Peaceful Birth Essentials course, which is really informational and has a lot in there. But the Peaceful Birth Method course covers everything, and it covers my entire framework for emotional preparation that help 100% of my moms feel confident going into birth, including emotional freedom technique, guided meditations, internal family systems, all these different tools that I use. You can also come to 2 group coaching calls. And so this would be Wednesday at 4 p.m. and Saturday at Pacific time, and Saturday at 10 a.m. Pacific time. And you can also access me by text with questions anytime. And a bonus to this, if you decide to get it within this next week when it is available, is that you can do a free one-on-one birth plan session with me. And so parents usually pay me hundreds of dollars for my program, and sometimes they pay thousands. Today I'm offering it for 7 days for $47. Woo woo! I have a link and I'm just going to drop it in the chat right now, but I'll also post it in school after this. And you all are welcome to, click on that if you feel like you want to pay. Okay, the link is in the chat. So all you would do is pay. And then after that, you can come to, I'll give you an email and we can schedule your birth plan session with me. And then we can also, give you the information to come to the group calls. What's stopping you? I wanted to cover this too. You might be thinking that sounds great, but a peaceful birth isn't possible for me because I already have a doula, or I'm taking an in-person course already, or I don't have the money to invest in my birth. And these are the things that often I hear moms say, and I just want to make something really clear. First off, with a doula is there to run the marathon with you, right, alongside you during your birth. But birth preparation is there to prepare you for the marathon. And it is this deeper personalized support that you get through the coaching program that we don't get with doulas. We need both. It's really great to have someone who can be there for your birth, but getting the deeper preparation beforehand is what paves the way to have a more peaceful birth from the beginning. Also, a lot of moms say, I'm already taking an in-person class, and so that's going to teach me what I need to know. I teach in-person classes, and I have been teaching for 6 years, and the outcomes for my moms who take my in-person classes are not anywhere near as good. The reason why, and what I see again and again and again, is that they learn the things, but they then have information. They do not have support with organizing that information, with integrating that information, or personalizing it to them. They have information, but they don't have emotional support. They have me telling them try this and that tool, but then it's up to them on their own to do that. And they're still on their own figuring that out and going through their own emotional preparation. And having someone who can support you on the call in releasing fear and expanding your nervous system capacity to feel confident and prepared for birth is what completely changes the game, and is why the people who take my who go through my program have incredible outcomes, and the moms who go through my in-person class still have good outcomes, but often their fear leads to them having experiences that they didn't want. And then, the third would be I don't have money to invest in my birth. And I just wanted to say that in the West, we find it appropriate to invest in a wedding, right? A lot of money in a wedding, a graduation, these different moments where you go through an initiation in life, we invest. But then with birth, it's do whatever is cheapest. And it's weird. That's just what our culture says, and I don't really understand why, because I find that investing in birth is so much more important than a wedding, because you'll remember your wedding forever, but you'll remember your birth forever too. And your long-term intimacy, pelvic floor health, and more, the experience of the potential of trauma, that's not on the table with a wedding, but it is with a birth. I wanted to end by just sharing, remember earlier I was talking about Emily, the mama who came to me at 35 weeks, and she was so terrified of giving birth. I just wrote out the things that she did differently to help her have a more positive birth experience. After working with me, she didn't go into birth hoping for the best, which is not a great way to enter birth. And that is how so many moms go into birth right now. They're okay, I learned some stuff and I hope it all works out. I'm just hoping for the best. I want you to go into birth being I've got this. I can't wait to give birth. I'm have everything that I need, and I feel really, really good about this experience. That's the place I want you to enter birth from. Number 2, she knew that doulas don't replace birth preparation, and a lot of moms make this mistake. Doulas are totally necessary for birth itself. You want to have someone with you who can give you some support with advocacy and who can give you support with coping tools for sure, but they don't replace birth preparation. You will get some in-person meetings probably with your doula beforehand, but that is to clarify their role, and that is to talk about what it is that you're wanting, what their role is, kind of get to know them. You cannot get all of the childbirth education and emotional preparation support in a couple meetings with your doula. Number 3, she was emotionally prepared, so she didn't go in with fear, because we cleared that in the calls. And that is what changed everything for her. If she went into birth with a fear of pain, it was more likely she would have had a longer and more uncomfortable birth, because she would have entered the fear, pain, tension cycle, where we have fear in the presence of pain, and then we tense our whole body because we are like afraid. And when we have tension, we create more pain, which creates more fear, which creates more tension. And so many moms go into birth this way, but she didn't. And that is one of the reasons she had a 4-hour birth. She also knew that information wasn't enough, because she already had taken a birth class. She had a doula and she had a midwife who provide personalized support. But even with a birth class, a doula, and a midwife, she had personalized support around the birth specifically and around her medical care. And she had information from a birth class, but she did not have personalized birth preparation support. And that's what she needed. And number 5 was that she recognized the importance of investing in birth preparation. When we invest a little bit of money up front, we can often save money long term. Because, if you have like standard insurance and you get a hospital bill, if you have a cesarean, if you have a epidural, even if you tear and you need pelvic floor therapy down the road, all of those things can increase the cost of your birth. And investing just a little bit up front saves money long term. And she knew that. And so she recognized that if I invest a little bit now, it's very unlikely that I'm going to have to pay more later for other things. So that is my whole 5-step process in a nutshell. I've shared everything that I possibly could in an hour. It was so fun to take the time to chat with everybody about one of my favorite things, my most passionate work, which is I hope you all have a beautiful, empowering, and positive birth experience. And if you have not scheduled a free birth breakthrough session with me, definitely schedule it. It's free, and I'll make sure that you leave the call feeling more confident and prepared afterwards. And if you're curious about my program, join the Peaceful Birth Intensive and DM me if you have any questions. I hope you all have a beautiful day. Bye.